Most of us don't need a book to recall the events of April 15th, 2013 and the days that followed. We all heard the bomb blasts, either while standing near the Boston Marathon finish line or watching the events unfold on the news. We remember the intense manhunt, the lockdown, the capture of the surviving suspect. We've mourned those killed and have been inspired by the survivors. But the authors behind the new book, Boston Strong, say there's more to the story than the narrative we all know so well. And they're here tonight to share some of what they uncovered. Dave Wedge is a former investigative reporter for the Boston Herald, and Casey Sherman is a journalist and a prolific true crime author. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So this is a story that many people will think they know. What did you guys learn when you were working on this book that was news to you, that you hadn't known before?
Yeah, sure. You know, we thought we knew the story as well until we actually got into the living rooms of a lot of these survivors and these first responders and these government officials that were really starting to absorb and understand what they had gone through, because we were all getting that data very, 24/7 when the bombings happened and during the course of the manhunt. But, with the perspective of a few months behind them, they were actually willing or able at the for the first time to understand what they'd gone through. So what we really found out was, the resiliency of these folks, the day-to-day trauma and agony of their injuries that they still suffer to this day. A lot of people think that it was, 2 years ago in some people's minds is ancient history. It's not for these survivors.
Dave, was it ever difficult for you on a personal level to hear these stories and hear about the sort of suffering that Casey was talking about? When I was looking through the book, started reading the section about Martin Richards, or the bit about Martin Richards' day and how his day was going before the marathon. And it honestly was a little hard for me to take, and I had to put the book down. Did that take a toll on you?
Well, as someone who has done hard news for 20 years and at the Herald 14, I've covered a lot of tragic stories, but certainly, as we've said, and as Mayor Walsh said in his foreword, he said that some of the stuff you're going to read in our book is not easy to read. It's sad what happened, especially to the Richard family. Really, you can't imagine more trauma than that family has endured. But as Casey said, what we really try to do is move beyond just that. We tell those stories so people know what happened, but we also tell the stories about how they recovered from that and how they are recovering from that. They're never going to be back to where they were on April 12th, 2013, but they are moving forward with their lives.
How wide a range of strategies did the victims use to try to recover? I was really interested in the approach you described Michelle LaRue taking, and I think we have a quote that we can show. She sort of turned her recovery into a personal battle with the Tsarnaevs. You guys, right? She pictured, this is I think when she's running on a treadmill and is trying to get to maybe 1 mile on the treadmill. She pictured the faces of Jahar and Tamerlan Tsarnaev. It's something she does regularly whenever her arm or leg injury is becoming an obstacle. And then you go on to write, she gets to the mile mark and says to them, I won,
That's
if I
right.
remember right. So is that a strategy that other victims use to recover? Did they make it adversarial, or did they take a different tack?
I think everybody has their own way of doing it, but someone like Michelle, that really fueled her fires, so to speak, to kind of move forward and not let the terrorists win, so to speak. That's a term that she used a lot with us.
And that's a theme that we saw with a lot of the different survivors. They weren't going to let their lives be dictated by just this tragic event in their lives. They were going to try to move beyond it, and they were going to use it as motivation to do things that they'd never done before. Mary Daniel is another survivor who never ran before, wasn't very athletic until she lost a leg in the bombing, and a year and a half later she's training for races where she can use her cycle, etc. So I think, people, everybody mourns differently, everybody recovers at a different, in a different way, but there are some survivors that just use this as incredible motivation to move forward.
You talked about Mayor Walsh's introduction. There was a line in there that I wanted to ask you guys about. He talks about Boston and the way Boston responded to these attacks. Let's go to another quote. Boston is a proud city, a fiercely loyal city. We will not be held down. We will not be afraid. We are strong. We are Boston strong. Do you guys think, having spent a lot of time working on this, that Boston responded to these attacks in a different way than another city would have?
I think, we like to think that in Boston. I'd like to think most cities would respond in a similar fashion, but the reality is, like Mayor Walsh said, we are fiercely loyal. We're we're colloquial here in Boston. We have each other's backs. So I think what happened in the aftermath of the bombings is kind of a microcosm of how we react to things as Bostonians. We pull together in difficult times.
And well, I was going to say we're a very tribal city. You know, you have different factions, different neighborhoods that have their border skirmishes, if you will, over the course of time. But when there's a foreign invader, whether it be the British or whether it be two Chechen brothers, then they unite. Then we unite as a people. And, you know, people outside of Boston talk about the lockdown and talk about certain civil liberties that were suspended over time. And I said that lockdown wasn't done out of fear. That lockdown was very strategic. It was actually done because of the transportation system. Started with the train system, and they couldn't lock down one particular neighborhood without locking down the entire city. And we found out that there was a great fear about sleeper cells being activated at that time. So it was about cutting off, you know, the choke points or the escape points of the Tsarnaev brother who was still living at the time, and some possible, you know, accomplices if they were out there. You know, to us, this was the, you know, the greatest citizens arrest in American history, because you had grandmothers, you had mothers and fathers all pushing, you know, images of black hat and white hat out on social media. It was
such an intense time.
It was.
Yeah. It was. There's a commercial on TV right now that some have said takes advantage of the Boston Strong phrase and the marathon bombings for commercial purposes. It's a McDonald's commercial, and I think we can run a clip of it.
Said we are not shining stars. This I know, I never said we are. If you're lost and alone, or you're sinking like a stone, carry on.
Casey, I hadn't seen that until just now. Neither did you. What was your reaction?
Well, you know, I understand the feeling behind it, and for me, it's all about reminders. People need to be reminded of these tragedies because they can't be put into the, you know, the backlog of history. And I would say that anything out there, and I know McDonald's is being criticized for taking advantage of, you know, these tragedies, but to me, I think America does need to be reminded about the bad and the good in people.
All right, Casey Sherman, Dave Wedge, thank you both for being here, and congratulations.
Thank you.